Welcome to Telesur. This is From the South, from our studios in Caracas, Venezuela. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Let's begin. We begin with a story from Congress in Peru, which has closed the case to dismiss public prosecutor Pedro Chavarri. With 17 votes for and 9 against, Congress has rejected his dismissal. Earlier, social organizations demanded his removal in a protest. Demonstrators also say now is the time for investigations on Keiko Fujimori and others in power. In Honduras, the trial of those accused of murdering indigenous leader Berta Caceres has been suspended again. The court still hasn't responded to the demands of her family. Our correspondent, Gilda Silvestrucci, has the latest from Tegucigalpa.
The trial of the murderers of Berta Caceres remains suspended until the court gives an answer to the petitions filed by Berta Caceres' lawyers. On Wednesday, there will be a response to this petition to change the judges in the case. The lawyers argue that there has been arbitrary behavior, so we'll have to wait. But if this goes on too long, the period of preventing detention for the suspected killers could expire.
A group of over 1,500 migrants from Honduras is growing in size as they continue to walk north towards the United States. Their journey began on Saturday in the city of San Pedro Sula in the north of the country. A representative from the U.S. Embassy in Honduras expressed deep concern over the situation and said the people are being given false promises. Organizers say participants are not being promised anything, but are simply fleeing poverty and violence.
There are no work opportunities here. One has to look for the best opportunities. I'm traveling with 4 children, and we're heading to the United States. Donald Trump has to receive us, just as we receive the Americans over here. They will have to accept us over there.
I feel well, thank God, because we are all united like brothers, helping one another and fighting for an objective we all have. We are all staying positive. I hope we are all positive. No negativity.
And as the migrant caravan continues to head north, the government of Guatemala announced it won't be allowed to cross the border. In an official press release, Guatemala's migration services say that the caravan is promoting unsafe and irregular migration, adding that the journey is endangering national security as well as the safety of underage migrants. Let's hear from our correspondent in Guatemala, Mario Rosales.
The Honduran migrants caravan have managed to enter the Guatemalan territory with more than 3,500 people by the Agua Caliente border. This despite the attempt of Kimi Morales of government to deny the entry. The caravan is headed towards the Esquipulas city, where it will spend the night at the migrant house and they will continue to the United States. They claim that in Honduras there is no basic living conditions. They are victims of poverty, violence and criminal stalking by Maras gangs. The caravan has continued his course to Mexico, where the Secretary of Foreign Affairs said that it will not allow the access of the country. However, they managed to pass these obstacles with the human rights organizations' help.
That was Mario Rosales from Guatemala. Moving to Brazil, hundreds took to the streets of Rio de Janeiro to unite against fascism during a rally to honor late City Councilor Mariel Franco. The tribute was called in response to the destruction of a replica street sign with the councilwoman's name by 2 deputies from Jair Bolsonaro's far-right Social Liberal Party. Franco and her driver were shot dead in March as she returned from an event aimed at inspiring and empowering young black women. For many, she has become a symbol of the anti-Bolsonaro movement in the run-up to the presidential elections on its second round. And supporters of Bolsonaro are claiming that alleged electoral fraud prevented him from winning the elections. They took to the streets of Sao Paulo. According to them, there was tampering with the electronic system, the voting system in Brazil. Bolsonaro won 46% of the vote in the first round of the elections on October 7th. The runoff is set for October 28th against Fernando Haddad of the Workers' Party. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has announced the creation of six strategic regions to strengthen the productive resources of the country.
This fund will be circulating, it will be invested and will recover the economy. It will have as a starting capital 20 million petros or $1.2 billion for all the projects. 20 million petros for the fund of productive strategic regions. There won't be any delays.
According to WikiLeaks, the Ecuadorian government has partially lifted the communication ban on its founder, Julian Assange. Assange's phone and internet connection are being restored, as he will be also allowed to receive visitors. The government had cut his communications 7 months ago, alleging that Assange was interfering in Ecuador's foreign relations. He has been confined to the embassy in London for over 6 years. Coming up, more stories. Meanwhile, you can follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and my personal account at Carla G. Telesur. We'll be back. Welcome back. Farmers in Mexico have mobilized to demand the agreements reached with the government come into effect. Demonstrators from all over the country arrived to the Ministry of Finance to reject the lack of resources. Leaders have assured that the agricultural production of next year is in danger by the lack of government support. 700 campesinos in Colombia have protested to demand their right to live in peace. They ask for guarantees due to the latest murders in the region, adding that people have been dragged out of their homes and killed. A public prosecutor from Ocaña claims that clashes between the ELN and the EPL have unleashed a new wave of violence. The National Women's Summit in Argentina has come to an end. During the closing ceremony, it was announced that starting in 2019, the summit will be called the Plurinational Women's Summit. This as a way to be more inclusive towards participants from indigenous communities. Over the past 3 days, 73 workshops and countless other activities were held in the province of Chubut in defense of women's rights. But 10 women were arrested on Sunday night, while a number of others were wounded by rubber bullets. Police were seen dragging participants and forcing them into police cars. The organizers of the summit held the local government responsible for not protecting them from violence. They were released after this arrest. Earlier, Telesur spoke to Lisa Bull, who was at the summit in Trelew.
First of all, denounced that they tried to dampen our strength and our, we call it feminist tide, our strength as feminist movement. It was a really big march, over 3 kilometers of women and dissident identities. We are more than 50,000 people there in this march, and at the end of the march, police arrested some women. They were maltreating them. We know it. It were like about 10 women which were arrested by the police, and because of our fast reaction and demonstration and the police office, they let them free. some hours later, but we know that there will be investigations because of some charges they made them. It was a pacific and really nice march.
Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Roth, brings us more from the summit.
Earlier today, it was decided that the Women's National Summit of 2019 will be hosted in the city of La Plata. This in the midst of the repression this year's summit saw. On Sunday night, police repressed participants and 10 were detained with another 5 injured with gas and rubber bullets. Organizers held Governor Mariano Acquirioni and the Security Minister of Province accountable. They also said the government didn't comply with what was agreed upon in terms of security. Women on Saturday night were hit with stones, and on Sunday the same thing happened. When people called the police answered that they didn't have a car to go there, and if they needed protection, they should have paid extra for it. This is something unheard of when the police are the one responsible to keep these women safe. The demonstration was for the legalization of a free, legal and safe abortion, a very important debate here in Argentina. It was finally rejected by Senate, but the struggle continues on the streets until abortion is legal. There are also complaints about meddling by the church in public policies about sex education, something that was legally approved, but it is not applied in all the provinces.
That was Sabrina Roth from Argentina. El Salvador is still celebrating its first saint, after Pope Francis canonized the late Salvadoran Archbishop Oscar Romero. Thousands of Salvadorans witnessed the ceremony, which took place in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City.
Thousands filled the Metropolitan Cathedral in San Salvador to see firsthand Oscar Romero's elevation to sainthood by Pope Francis. Romero, who had often denounced repression and poverty, was gunned down on March 24, 1980, in his own church.
We are encouraged by our faith to take on a new path and take Monsignor Romero as an example of strength to face anything that comes our way. He showed us how to be brave, to be courageous indeed.
Worshippers also took part in a pilgrimage through the city's streets, in remembrance of Romero's fight for justice and for the poor, and how he stood up to the powers that be in the 1970s.
He stood up against the oligarchy and the powerful groups in the country. I don't think recognizing Monsignor Romero as a saint opens up wounds of the past. On the contrary, I think he needs to be recognized as the saint of the people.
And just before the canonization in Vatican City, a mass was offered to commemorate Monsignor Romero.
He was killed while he was holding a mass. He received death threats before he was murdered. Death squads placed the bomb under the altar of the Church of Sagrado Corazon. Those in power didn't like him at all.
The canonization of Monsignor Oscar Romero brings hope to the people, but now they are demanding the authorities prosecute those responsible for his murder.
The Caribbean community is confronting climate change from the perspective of its devastating effect on small islands. Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson spoke on behalf of CARICOM at the UN Committee on Climate Change.
As the Prime Minister of Barbados spoke in the General Assembly, that island, my island, was underwater, in some cases chest high. And I'm not talking about the chest of people as short like myself. 2 weeks ago, there was an earthquake off the shores of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Dominica. And just last week, Haiti experienced yet another devastating earthquake when its citizens were still trying to recover from the destructive and traumatic earthquake of 2010. We contribute the least to climate change, but we are simultaneously the most at risk from its negative effects and the least equipped to withstand and adapt to the social, environmental, and economic impacts of climate change.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made their latest report public. It states that if governments around the world want to achieve less than 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming, that we need to stop using fossil fuels immediately. Based on current usage, we are on track for an increase of more than 3 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. The sculptor of El Caleidoscopio, Spanish for kaleidoscope, has returned to Venezuela. Venezuelan Culture Minister Ernesto Villegas tweeted that it returned along with 86 Venezuelan migrants from Argentina as part of the Return to the Homeland program. The piece by Venezuelan artist Carlos Cruz Diez had been placed in a park in Buenos Aires for years. A new video game will be presented at the 40th Latin American Film Festival in Cuba. The video game, named Cinema in Cuba, uses data from films made and shown in Cuba. The style of the video game tries to appeal to the old cinema, and it's aimed at enjoying time with family and friends. Argentina's striker and football icon Lionel Messi will be the star in a new Cirque du Soleil show next year. Messi says it is incredible and crazy that he has inspired the show. Cirque du Soleil presents shows around the world every year and employs more than 4,000 people, including 1,300 artists from almost 50 countries. And now it's time for Messi. We'll take one last short break, but stay with us. Welcome back. The number of Yemenis on the brink of famine could rise to 12 million due to escalating war and a deepening economic crisis. The United Nations said it feared millions struggling to make ends meet would succumb to severe hunger and diseases. Saudi Arabia and its allies imposed a blockade on the country for several weeks, and Yemen imports 90% of its food. The UN is scaling up its emergency food and nutrition aid to reach those affected every month. And on this topic, our correspondent in Egypt, Hisham Wanous, has the latest.
Yemen is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in the world. According to the United Nations, the country is on the brink of the worst famine in 100 years. The situation has been escalating since Saudi Arabia and the UAE started their bombardment in 2015 in support of President Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi against Houthi fighters who have taken over vast swaths of the country. The conflict has killed around 2,200 children and endangered 5 million children who face starvation. The bombing has devastated civilians and infrastructure. There is a blockade on the main port of Hodeida, which was crucial for the import of food, commercial and humanitarian goods. The situation has also caused a serious health crisis with the rise in epidemics such as cholera. Yemen suffers from a lack of medicine, doctors, and hospitals. The United Nations says that they have lost a war against starvation because they can't carry out humanitarian work due to the lack of security. And as of now, there's no end in sight as prices soar and the bombing continues.
That was Hisham Wanous. Palestinians and activists clashed with Israeli forces in the village of Khan al-Amar, as residents feared a demolition of the village. At least 4 people were detained and 1 Palestinian remains in custody. Israeli forces are expected to evict more than 200 Palestinian residents from this area. Saudi Arabia is preparing to admit that journalist Jamal Khashoggi died during an interrogation. According to different media outlets, they may be preparing a report to acknowledge the journalist died during an interrogation that went wrong. Turkish police has searched the Saudi consulate, last place where he was seen, looking for clues on Khashoggi's disappearance. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State is heading to Saudi Arabia to meet with King Salman on the issue of Khashoggi. After a conversation with the king, President Donald Trump confirmed that he was sending Mike Pompeo immediately. Khashoggi was last seen walking into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul 2 weeks ago. He was never seen again. Thousands of residents in Tibet are in temporary shelters after a landslide struck Thursday morning. The first batch of disaster relief supplies has arrived to the area. Workers have been striving to restore power supplies and telecommunication services. Medicine and sanitary emergency supplies are being provided, and 32 health service stations are being set up near relocation sites.
The autonomous region has allocated 570 million yuan for disaster relief work, including 240 million yuan of subsidies to victims and 260 million yuan to be used for road repair in disaster-hit areas. The local government has assembled over 60 emergency medicines and other sanitary emergency supplies and has set up 32 health service stations near the relocation sites.
Hurricane Leslie is hitting Portugal after passing through Spain. 300,000 homes have been left without electricity already, and thousands of trees were uprooted. It is the strongest Atlantic storm to reach the country since 1842. Leslie has left at least 11 people killed in France. Let's look at our top news from around the world.
France is prepared to help in North Korea's denuclearization efforts on the condition that it proves its commitment to the process. The announcement comes as South Korea's President Moon Jae-in is meeting his counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, in Paris. Although France is not directly involved in talks between the United States and the Koreas, its nuclear know-how could help prevent escalation.
As a state with a nuclear arsenal, France is ready to contribute its cooperation on a technical level to that process. We have an operational, technical, and scientific expertise in the nuclear field, which, in terms of denuclearization, would certainly be useful, and which we would offer up if that seemed pertinent.
Hundreds of Moroccans have marched through the streets of Casablanca protesting against widespread corruption. Trade unions, political parties, and non-governmental organizations participated. According to the Transparency International and the Business Anti-Corruption Portal, Morocco has a culture of corruption enabled by nepotism and bribery. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni just added a pair of Yeezy trainers to his wardrobe. He was gifted them personally by Kanye West and wife Kim Kardashian on a visit to the country. In addition to the gift from West's own fashion line, they discussed the promotion of tourism and arts. Museveni said on Twitter that they had fruitful discussions.
An Islamic boarding school in Indonesia is offering a safe haven for trans people. The Pesantren Waria Al-Fatah School takes care of the Waria, an Indonesian word for woman and man, as the trans community is locally known. The school has suffered intimidations and threats, but its work continues. Hardline Islamist groups have prompted hostility against the LGBTI community in recent years. And climate change continues to endanger the habitats of the penguin population in southern Africa. October 13th marked the International Penguin Awareness Day. Experts say that the number of breeding pairs and spaces for these penguins has decreased significantly in recent years due to the rising sea levels. And with those penguins, we've come to the end of this news brief. But there's and many other stories. You can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. Here you can find all our latest information on what's going on in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in Africa as well. So go check it out. And you can also follow us on social media. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and until the next time, thank you for watching Telesur, connecting the Global South.